Hey guys, it's Wednesday. How we doing? All right. So this week, I'm gonna make this, I'm a few minutes late because we are on summertime around here. Our schedule has gone all crazy. So how's everybody doing this morning? You guys having a good summer? We are in the thick of it now, right? If you are anywhere in the Midwest, you know it's gonna get hot. We're gonna be at the pool, I think, for the rest of the week. All right. So let's get into it. This week on the Transforming Anxiety podcast, this is episode number 24. And this week we're talking about the effects of anxiety on your body. So it's easy to write off anxiety or any emotion as just a feeling, right? Not that big of a deal. It's just a feeling. I can contain this. I can handle this. I can manage this, right? But anxiety in particular, it has this emotional side. There's the emotion of anxiety. It also has the physical component, right? There's this strong physical side, that fight or flight stress response that we have to consider when we're thinking about the toll that anxiety ultimately takes on our body. So there's short-term effects, right? We all know what this feels like when we're feeling actively anxious. We're in that stress response and we start feeling, maybe our heart rate is increasing, our heart's pounding, our palms get a little sweaty, our breathing is coming really fast and shallow, right? These are some of the immediate effects. But I, in this episode, wanted to look at what some of the long-term, more lasting effects of feeling anxious over and over and over again. What does that look like? And here's what's important. When you have a thought that creates anxiety in your body and your mind interprets that as a threat and kicks off this whole stress response, this whole fight or flight stress response, your body is flooded with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, right? So the chemistry of your body actually changes when you're feeling the physical component of anxiety. So there's the emotional side, you're feeling the feeling of anxiety, but you're also experiencing this physical aspect where you've got this dump of adrenaline and cortisol into your bloodstream. These stress hormones have an impact on our bodies, especially if we're experiencing anxiety over and over and over again, if it's becoming a chronic thing, right? So in the episode, I talk about 4 different systems of the body: respiratory, digestive, cardiovascular, and immune systems. And I talk about how anxiety affects each of those major systems of the body and how that impacts not only our mental and emotional well-being, right? That's the feeling part of anxiety, but how it impacts our overall physical health. So let's just do it kind of quickly here. I'll go into more this week's episode. So come on over to kellyhanlonmccormick.com/podcast/24 to listen in on this week's episode. You can also find it on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever you love to hang out and listen to podcasts. So let's think about first the respiratory system. This is one of those short-term immediate things. And really in the long term, I didn't find any research where anxiety had negative impacts on our respiratory system. But we can see that as we start that stress response, that fight or flight stress response, our breathing comes faster, right? Our body is reaching for more oxygen. So we're inhaling quicker and quicker and quicker because our body is trying to fully oxygenate our blood. And we're going to get into the cardiovascular thing in here in just a second. But it's trying to pull as much oxygen into our body as possible so that we are totally prepared to fight or to flee for our lives. So this is one of those short-term things that you experience in the moment. It rectifies itself with time, and then it's kind of over, right? So that's the respiratory part. Let's look at, we just touched on it, so let's look at the cardiovascular system next. So we're reaching for all of this oxygen to fully oxygenate our blood, and our heart starts pounding so that more blood flow is going to our muscles so that we are prepared to fight or to flee. So like if you're sitting, like think about our cave people ancestors, right? You're sitting there on the savannah, hanging out with your family, doing whatever. and you see a wild animal coming at you, right? The stress response immediately turns on to fully oxygenate your blood so that, and then that oxygenated blood, your heart's going to start pounding so that your muscles have more blood being pumped to them. Good morning, Tad. Hello. So that you are ready pretty much instantaneously to either fight or run for your life, right? So your cardiovascular system gets involved because it's trying to prepare your muscles to fight or run for your life. Now, again, in the short term, not such a big deal, right? This rectifies itself, that kind of goes away, and then everything is fine. However, if you're experiencing chronic anxiety, right? If you're constantly kicking off that stress response and your body is constantly overproducing, right? It's sending more blood to your muscles than you need because you're not actually fighting or fleeing for your life, right? It's a response that we just don't need in our luxurious, safe day and age, right? It's a feature that's nice to have of our body, but it's kind of like the airbag on a car. We hope we don't need it. And so most of the time we're experiencing anxiety in a place where we're actually having to sit still, right? And it's like, be cool, get through this meeting, get through this conversation with your partner, whatever that looks like. So you're sitting still, but your body is pumping blood to your muscles so that you're prepared to fight or to flee. What happens is this creates wear and tear on your entire cardiovascular system, right? You've prepared your body for something you don't need to be prepared for. You've artificially amped up this over-oxygenated blood supply that's going to your muscles so that you're armed and ready, and you don't need it. And because of that, right, there's this wear and tear on your cardiovascular system that actually ends up fatiguing your heart over time. So there's been some studies, and I talk about this in the podcast. Johns Hopkins has done some studies. There were many that I found, but this is the one that that was super fascinating. You can find it online. How when we're doing this chronically, when our cardiovascular system is experiencing this over and over and over again, it fatigues our cardiovascular system and our heart, and it leaves us not only more prone to wear and tear and issues like heart attacks, heart disease, right? That whole cardiovascular system is getting mucked up by these stress hormones. But what I found really for those people who have heart issues, they've already had a heart attack, they've already experienced some amount of heart disease, it can prove to be harder for those people to recover, right? And to get back to homeostasis, status quo, or even optimal health, because they're constantly fatiguing that system. Does that make sense? So it's like it's harder for them to repair it and to heal it because they keep attacking it, right? They keep overly fatiguing it. So I thought that was fascinating and just something for us to pay attention to. Not only are we using our cardiovascular system in a way that we don't need to be, but we're also preventing ourselves, if we were to have a heart episode, it's harder for us to recover. So interesting. Okay, so next up is digestive system. Now this one is probably one that doesn't surprise you, right? Most of us, when we feel anxious, we get kind of nauseous. We get it's like you have to go to the bathroom all of the time. All of that stuff is tied up in there. And it's one of those things maybe you haven't thought about, but our digestive system is definitely impacted by feeling anxious. So when you're feeling anxious, you're going to have to go to the bathroom, because think about, if your body is preparing itself to fight or to flee, that's easier to do on an empty bladder, right? So your body's going to try to eliminate all of the waste that it can. It's going to pause digestion. So if you've recently eaten, it's going to pause that, because all of that energy, all of those resources is now going towards fighting or fleeing. It doesn't want to expend any energy on something that's unnecessary, like digesting food, when it has to prepare you to fight or run for your life. So the digestive system gets paused. And in the moment, again, this isn't such a big deal if it happens occasionally, right? Because then we complete the stress response cycle, digestion gets turned back on, everything goes back to how it was. Not such a big deal. However, over time, digestion can be seriously impacted. So cortisol is the stress hormone that blocks unnecessary processes from proceeding when we're in the stress response and when we're in that fight or flight stress response, right? So if cortisol is constantly blocking your digestion and cortisol is constantly messing with that smooth system of digesting your food and providing fuel and nutrients to your body, in the short term, not a big deal. But over time, this can lead to things like digestive issues, disease, and weight gain. Ultimately, the food isn't getting digested in the best possible way. Your whole digestive system isn't working as efficiently as it can, and this can lead irritable bowel syndrome is one of the things that kept coming up when I was researching this episode and looking at the digestive system and chronic anxiety. That irritable bowel syndrome was up there in so many studies that they're really looking at the link between the two. But there's other things like ulcers, stomach cramps, loose stools, all of this that has to go with feeling anxious. And when we have this on an ongoing basis, first of all, it's super uncomfortable. But second of all, we can start creating illnesses in our bodies, right? We can start creating weight gain in our bodies. Here's another interesting thing about weight gain and cortisol is that when we have extra cortisol in our bodies and it's shutting down unnecessary processes, our bodies start thinking, okay, I've had to do this fight or flight stress response. I've used all this energy. So our bodies think that if the stress response has been kicked off, that has been completed by fighting or fleeing for our life. So our body thinks that it's expended all of this energy. So what happens then is that we get really hungry. We start craving sugary, fatty calories because our bodies think that it needs to be replenished because we've just expended all of this energy. Our bodies don't realize that we've just been sitting still in a meeting freaking out about something somebody said, right? And that we haven't actually expended any energy at all. So then here comes the cart of donuts, or here comes, the cookies and brownies and sodas or whatever, and your body is saying, oh yes, that's exactly what we need. We've got to replenish all of this fuel, and look what's readily available here. So not only is cortisol messing with our digestive system and causing potential weight gain and physical ailments that way, but it also encourages us to crave sugary, fatty foods that take away from our overall physical health because we're not making nutritious whole food choices. Right? So this is like a double whammy where cortisol and our digestive system. So I go into a little bit more in the episode, check that out. And this is, like I said, this is stuff you can easily Google if you look at, digestive system and anxiety, right? What are the impacts of anxiety on our digestive system? You'll find a whole bunch of studies. And like I said, irritable bowel syndrome will show up in a lot of them. So the last one I want to touch on is our overall immune system. So again, cortisol shows up and blocks all unnecessary processes. Cortisol also blocks antibodies, which create inflammation, but it blocks antibodies from doing their job in our body. Okay? So in the short term, again, this makes sense. All necessary resources and energy are going towards fighting or fleeing for our life. So this all makes sense. But in the long term, if we're constantly turning on and off these antibodies that are trying to keep us healthy, that are trying to support our immune system, if we're constantly turning those on and off, then we fall prone to every cold and flu bug that comes our way. Our immune system overall gets weaker because we've got these stress hormones messing with the processes, right? We've got it messing with the smooth function of our immune system if it were just left alone. So we've talked about respiration, we've talked about cardiovascular, we've talked about digestive and immune support. Our immune system is another thing that really gets impacted when we're experiencing anxiety on an ongoing chronic basis. So I tell you all of this today, and I did this episode not as a scare tactic, because that's not what I want to be doing, but as we've got to pay attention to the role stress and anxiety plays in our life. We have to pay attention to this as more than just a feeling, right? And just the discomfort, and I can get through it. We have to consider the overall effects that this has on our physical health. This is truly, like, our emotions and our physical health are all tied together. And anxiety is one of those emotions that really, really makes that clear. So I wanted to share all of this today so that you could really appreciate what's happening in your body. The more that we can understand about anxiety and the stress response, the more familiar that we get with it, the more knowledge we have about it, the more we can understand what's happening when we're feeling actively anxious, when we're in that stress response. And then we don't need to freak out about the fact that we're freaking out, right? We don't need to add the suffering on top of that pain. We don't need to have thoughts about the thoughts that are creating the anxiety. Then we just get all into this spin, and it's like layer upon layer. We don't need to do that, right? So the more we can understand about anxiety and the stress response, the better. But I also wanted to show you, we need to caretake for our physical health. That's not news to anybody. And caretaking for our mental and emotional health is a significant way to caretake for our physical health, especially where something like stress and anxiety is concerned. So I wanted to share the impacts on these major systems of the body so that we can start really appreciating the need to create change in our minds, change in our lives, change in our experiences of stress and anxiety, right? So the other thing, just a side note, is it's easy to write off anxiety as just an emotion, or to think, I'll get to it later. I know that's something that I need to look at. I know it's something I want to create change around. I know it's something I need to talk about with somebody. I know it's something that I need help transforming, and I need help having a different experience of it, right? It's easy to say that and to just keep putting it off. But our emotions fuel our actions. So aside from all the physical stuff, which is important enough, right? If our emotions fuel our actions and you're feeling anxious on an hourly or daily basis, right? Your actions are being fueled by anxiety. That is showing up and is creating behaviors that you're taking in the world. So you have to ask yourself, what percentage of my life is being fueled by anxious energy? Right? How much of what I do is driven by the feeling of anxiety? Is that who I want to be in the world? Is that how I want to show up? Now, I've had like high-powered execs. I've had dozens and dozens of them come through my practice over the years. And something that almost all of them are worried about or ask me about when we're considering whether coaching is a good fit for them and whether they do actually want to transform their experience of anxiety, is this idea that anxiety is what gives them their edge, right? That anxiety is what helps them be successful. That anxiety is what keeps them like moving forward. And I just want to share, folks, there's nothing that you can do from the feeling of anxiety. There's nothing that you're fueling with anxiety that you cannot do 100 times better when you're fueling it with something you want to be feeling. So if you're an executive, even if you're not an executive, right? No matter what you're doing, whether this is parenting, whether this is relationships, whether this is finances, whether it's your physical health, whether it is work, right? But you don't feel or resonate with the whole like high-powered corner office thing, right? Whatever you're doing that you think anxiety boosts your momentum, right? I say, let's clean that up, because it's not true. That's never true. That's like saying I'm a better person when I'm mad. I'm a better person when I'm impatient. No, there's so many things that you can do better if you're not angry about it or if you're not feeling impatient, right? So same is true for anxiety. Anxiety is not the motivation any of us need, ever. But if you're curious about that, and if you feel like anxiety has given you a certain amount of edge or a certain amount of drive, let's clean up your mind and start generating emotions like ambition or purpose or passion or drive, right? We can generate emotions like that by cleaning up your mind, getting rid of the ick of anxiety. And when I say getting rid of the ick of anxiety, I mean transforming how you experience anxiety and not relying on that as the way to success, right? Not relying on that as the motivator for getting ahead, right? Let's clean up your mind and create the emotions that would feel really good and that would fuel action in a totally different way for you. So good to think about. So In this episode, I didn't do a freebie for you this week. I feel like it would have just been a list of resources, and you have Google just like I do. But look at this week. Consider how anxiety is impacting you physically, right? Look at these 4 different systems: respiratory, cardiovascular, digestive, immune. Look at these 4 systems in your body and see, like, have you been affected by anxiety? How have you been affected by anxiety? How has your physical health been impacted by an ongoing feeling of anxiety? Just good to look at. Just good to consider that if you were to transform your experience of anxiety, you would also be transforming your physical health. Huge, right? And also consider, like I said, if you've kind of written off anxiety as like, oh, I'll get around to it, right? I'll change that later. It's just a feeling. It's not that big of a deal. Not only hold on to the importance of your physical health and how this impacts it long term, but also consider you don't need anxiety to get done what you think you're getting done by feeling anxious, ever, ever. Anything that you think anxiety is fueling or keeping you edgy or keeping you hungry for, you can do 100 times better with a feeling that you generate on purpose, right? That then fuels all of your behaviors and who you're being in the world. So good. All right. DM me here if you have questions. I would love to hear from you. Find me on Instagram. I will see you at the same time, same place next week. Next week, we're going to stay with this physical stuff a little bit, and we're going to talk about sensations and feelings. And what I mean is there's sensations that we have in our body, things like hot, thirsty, cold, tired, hungry, right? Those are sensations that we have in our body. And then there are feelings: mad, glad, sad, happy, angry, right? But there's a handful of things that have both an emotional and a physical side. Anxiety is one of them. So I want to explore that a little bit and pull in some other examples, because what usually happens is there's 1 or 2 of these things that we really understand and it's working really smoothly for us in our lives and in our bodies. And cross-pollinating what we know from that into what we're learning about anxiety can help when we're transforming our experience of anxiety. So we're going to get into that next week, episode number 25, and I will see you at the same time, same place here on Facebook, 11 a.m. next week, Central Time. Okay, have an amazing week, right? Have an amazing chunk of hot summer, if you're anywhere near where I am, and I will see you next week. Take care, guys. Bye for now.